Well, hello, everybody out there. And a big topic this week is the collapse of FTX, the cryptocurrency trading company operating out of the Bahamas, and $32 billion worth of crypto coin that's poof, disappeared. Now, Mark Collinsworth, the CIO of Vere Global Financial Wealth Management, you're up to speed on all the maneuvers that go on in the financial world. My big question is, how the heck could this have happened without any red flags, without any warnings, without anybody doing anything to stop it before the collapse? How could this happen?
Well, Larry, looking at it, this was a very complex structure. This is not something somebody put together, just walked off the street. It was a very elaborate structure, not to mention the FTX actually headquartered themselves in the Caribbean. And from my experience, there's only one reason why you want to be headquartered in the Caribbean for something. That's because you're doing things that aren't regulatory correct.
Well, now, it's headed by supposedly by Sam Bankman-Fried. What is he, 29 years old? Looks like a
Yeah.
hippie. Dresses in very casual attire, even when he's meeting people like President Clinton and all that. And he's embraced by all of them. Now, is he that much of a genius? Now, he's being touted as the J.P. Morgan of his generation, the Warren Buffett, et cetera, et cetera. So is he just a dopey kid who's a figurehead, or is he the real genius behind this?
No, because the structures they had set up on this, these were very elaborate corporate structures in the Caribbean. Um, a 29-year-old probably doesn't know how to set these structures up. There had to be some kind of very, like a law firm, you probably remember when the Panama Papers with Mossack Fonseca, which was the big law firm that specialized in money laundering and elaborate corporate structures.
Yeah.
I'm sure this guy had to find somebody like that because no 29-year-old knows how to set these structures up. You have to come to somebody like me to set those structures up. And they're very complex structures.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just amazed that he got away with it for this long, or they got away with it. Who's ever really pulling the strings? Now, could we say that this is in effect a money laundering operation?
I very much say it is money laundering. That's why you go to the Caribbean. You go to the Caribbean to launder money.
Well, you know what I find interesting is how the feedback loop here. It was people uh, investing in the company. The money that the U.S. is sending to Ukraine, some of that money, Ukraine in turn is investing in FTX. And FTX in turn is using some of their money to pay
Finance
off
campaigns.
Democrats with
Yeah.
campaign donations. So
Yeah.
that loop, the money we're sending to Ukraine, Ukraine invests in FTX, FTX loops it back to Democrats in the form of campaign donations. I mean, that should have been obvious as the noses on our faces, and nobody raised an alarm. So was it a matter that it was a wink and a nod because they wanted the money and they knew darn well what was going on?
Well, and I agree with that. Also, what I find interesting is there were some very high-end private equity companies that actually put some financing into FTX. These private equity companies, they specialize in how to weed out, questionable companies. Why were they financing these operations? Was it their way of basically indirectly financing campaign donations that they didn't want to be directly involved in? I just find that very suspicious.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing is just amazing. But you've been saying for a long time now that you're a financial advisor. You help people invest their money, and you stayed strictly away from cryptocurrency.
Mhm.
Now, is this a prime example of why you should have nothing to do with it, or are there cryptocurrency exchanges that are legitimate and can actually be profitable?
I think Bitcoin overall is just a big scam. I mean, Bitcoin what hit 66,000 sometime late last year, early this year. Now it's trading at 16,000. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just a scam. I don't know why people want to invest in it. It makes no sense whatsoever why you want to own something like this.
Well, another thing that's very interesting there is FTX was also giving campaign donations, quotes, to political figures on both sides of the aisle who were acting as regulators of these operations. So the regulators that were supposed to be keeping an eye on FTX and other firms like that are getting campaign contributions from them. So, I mean, I would think that that's a slight conflict of interest that nobody picked up
Very
on.
much so, yeah. And that's what, when people are involved in scams, they like to make sure they're paying off everyone. They're paying off politicians to make sure regulations stay favorable, paying off regulators to make sure no one takes too close of a look. And not to mention, I'm sure somewhere's in the books, FTX has a very high powered law firm behind them that helped them set up the structures and everything. What's also interesting, they'd headquarter themselves in the Bahamas. The Bahamian government actually seized $2 billion worth of assets from FTX. That's just more money that's never going to be recovered from the bankruptcy.
Yeah, and what's going to happen to Samuel Bankman-Fried, the CEO of FTX? I mean, is he really going to face any consequences like jail time or at least fines, or is he going to skip off and stay in the Bahamas scot-free?
I think there'll be some charges brought up against him for the simple reason I think politicians that probably took campaign donations probably want to really make sure this thing gets quieted down. And he'll probably, some deal might be cut. He might spend 3 or 4 years in prison because a deal was cut with his friends versus 20 to 30 years in prison.
So he'll keep his mouth shut in terms of the deals that were being made behind the scenes with Democrat and the regulators in order to cut his jail time. So he'll just take the fall for it, and those who were really in on it walk away free without any consequences.
Yeah, and the same people. I've always found whenever people are actually get caught committing the crimes, especially in politicians, they try to crack down on the case, the problem even more. To say, well, we need to take care of this problem, and it just kind of irritates me. But they're the ones that were in the problem to begin with. I don't see how the regulators, how politicians can regulate the business that is paying them money. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
So, I mean, overall, Mark, now what does this say about the political system, about how rotten Washington is in terms of corruption, in terms of special interests that are really driving the government? Is this yet another example of how little control the citizen, the voting citizen has in terms of what actually goes on in Washington, in terms of what our representatives, who we supposedly elect to office to help us, are controlled by forces that have nothing to do with their constituents' interests?
That's one of my longer term concerns. Politicians don't really care about the people that vote for them. They absolutely don't. Politicians get into politics because some way it's going to pad themselves. I mean, look at the number of politicians right now that are hedge fund managers, private equity that are involved in investments. Why do they want to go and leave a job that was paying them $6, $7 million a year salary? They were running a company, and what they said go. No one could come in there and tell them how to run the business. They said it, and they didn't have to get 200 votes or anything. Their word was golden. Why did they leave those businesses and now want to run in politics, making $200,000 a year, and they have to get 200 people on their side to get anything done? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. They're simply there for insider trading. They're in there to set up structures that put money in their pockets. It's just politics is just another form of corruption right now.
What ripple effect will the fall of FTX have on the American economy generally? I mean, is it going to be like a bunch of building blocks tumbling down, domino effect?
FTX, it will have no effect right now on the U.S. economy. But I think what the bigger problem with FTX tells you is there's a whole lot more problems. FTX, I think, based on everything I know about digital currencies and all the research I've done, FTX is just the very, very tip of the iceberg. This problem's going on across the board underneath, and it's just a matter of time before those blow up as well.
So, in terms of the cryptocurrency world, is this the beginning of the end of trading in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, or will that continue despite the fall of FTX?
I would say it's the beginning of the end of the crypto world. The Federal Reserve is not too far away from designing its own digital currency. I mean, and the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department has full power right now to make Bitcoin completely illegal in the United States. So ask yourself this, Larry, if you were in charge of the Federal Reserve and you're trying to push your own product, the digital currency out there, and you have the power to eliminate all your competition, what are you going to do? You
Yeah.
want people to buy your digital currency. You got to eliminate the competition. And it's just a matter of time before people are going to wake up one day and they're going to see their Bitcoin trading at zero.
Yeah. JFK had an experience similar to that, right? In another era.
Back in JFK's time, he actually created what was called the silver certificate. So you could actually it looks just like a $5 bill, $10 bill, but at the bottom of it says silver certificate. So you could go to a bank, and if you had a $10 silver certificate, you go to the bank and say, I want $10 worth of silver, and they could hand you over $10 worth of physical metal silver, right? That was a competitor against the Federal Reserve. People wanted the silver certificates versus the Federal Reserve notes, which the Federal Reserve note is just backed by the faith of the government, has no asset backing it. So when JFK died or was assassinated, within 24 hours, the Federal Reserve sent out memos to all the banks to start confiscating the silver certificate notes and took them out of circulation. Right there, they got rid of the competition. You're now forced to own the Federal Reserve notes.
Isn't that interesting? And of course, for those who don't realize it by now, the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with the federal government. It's a private operation.
It's a private bank. It's a private bank that's in the business of making a profit. A lot of people don't realize this. The Federal Reserve makes a profit every year. And let's not also forget, we talked about JFK. Let's not forget back in the 1930s when the Federal Reserve was pumping all this fiat currency to stimulate the economy in the Depression. People were taking the fiat currency and converting it to gold, which a lot of people say Bitcoin's like gold, right? Well, what did the Federal Reserve do? They made gold illegal and they confiscated it. They eliminated another one. So, they always say third time's a charm. Will the third time be Bitcoin being erased from circulation?
Oh, man. And so it goes. A favorite saying of mine from one of my favorite authors, Kurt Vonnegut. And so it goes. And nothing changes. Some of the players change, but history, if it doesn't repeat itself, it certainly rhymes. And
it does.
Nothing here that we haven't seen before in a different form. So Mark Collinsworth, the CIO of Vere Global Wealth Management, thanks again for this latest installment of what is and isn't actually driving the U.S. economy and private investment. Mark, thanks for being with us.
And thank you, Larry. And like I always say, it's always the darkest before things get really freaking bad.
Another great note to end on, Mark.
Yep.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye. Thank you.